Welcome to Face to Face. This is a show about change and about what's next. It's a show that wants to ask questions, peel back the layers of our average everyday experience, and go beyond scratching the surface. We interview amazing people with incredible ideas and stories who have done wild, weird, and wonderful things. Remember that imagination shared creates collaboration, and collaboration creates community, and community inspires social change. I'm David Peck, and this is Face to Face. So my interview today is with Hayden Taylor. We talk about his new book, Take Us to Your Chief and Other Stories. It's kind of a blending of classic science fiction stories with a very contemporary First Nations worldview or outlook or approach. We talk about Aboriginal consciousness. We talk about comedy and about storytelling, and we talk about this concept of contact and this whole idea of being an alien and being sort of introduced to aliens. We talk about being self-educated and how one of the best ways to learn is through reading, traveling, and meeting and talking with other people. Drew is a playwright. He's a comedian. He's a writer. He's done documentary film. And there's a lot going on in this conversation. I think you're going to enjoy it a great deal. So do stay tuned. DavidPeckLive.com for more information about my public speaking, my writing, and for close to 250 interviews now. We still even have a few TIFF interviews coming your way. And also Rabble.ca for more interviews there and other articles as well. So do check us out online and stay tuned. Hayden Taylor, talking about a whole lot of things, including his new book, Take Us to Your Chief. Well, welcome to Face to Face. We're joined by, once again, another very special guest. Hayden Taylor is here with us today from Toronto, but not really from Toronto. I think he's in Toronto. He's on a phone somewhere mysteriously calling in to this interview on Face to Face. Drew, thanks so much for joining us today.
Absolutely, my pleasure, sir.
So what are we talking about today, Drew? I think you've got a new book on the shelves. It's called Take Us to Your Chief and Other Stories, with a really interesting cover and classic sci-fi stories with a contemporary First Nations outlook. So tell me about the mix. Tell me about you first, Drew. Tell me a little bit about what preceded Take Us to Your Chief.
Well, I'm from a small reserve in central Ontario, a place called Curve Lake, where I was born and raised. And I grew up watching science fiction on television. And then from there, I started reading a lot of science fiction. I became enamored with it. And as a writer, contemporary storyteller, I couldn't help but notice that there were not that many Aboriginal taglines or faces or fingertips on keyboards in the science fiction genre, and I always wondered why. I'm a big fan of exploring different aspects of expressing the Aboriginal consciousness or universe.
Right.
This has always bugged me, and then for several years now, I've tried to get together an anthology of Native science fiction short stories. I contacted a whole bunch of my Native friends, writers, like Richard Van Camp, Eden Robinson, Lee Miracle, people like that, to see if they'd be interested in contributing a short story. Everybody was really interested to do it, but I couldn't find a publisher that was willing to take a chance on such an endeavor, because I've always, it seemed to me, the term Aboriginal science fiction, many people thought of it as an oxymoron,
right,
terms. And it just got to the point about a year and a half ago where I just said to myself, screw it, I'll do it myself. And I sat down, and over a 2-month period, I wrote 6 of the stories, and then over a 6-month period, I wrote another 4 stories, until I had a nice package together, and then I sent it off to one of my publishers, and they read it, they liked it, and they said, let's rock and roll with it.
So First Nations, would you say, is it fair to kind of describe it as a First Nations take on the science fiction genre?
Well, what I've done is I've taken science fiction themes and common stories, and filtered them through an Aboriginal consciousness, where they come out and they have, I think they appeal and have elements of both, I guess you could even say genres involved in them. So yeah, they're both native and science fiction, and both science fiction and native.
So Drew, what exactly is an Aboriginal consciousness?
It's the environment we grew up in. It's the indigenous world that we're born into, that we've participated in, that is part of who we are and how we live our lives. In terms of my writing, some of the interesting themes that popped up that were important in the science fiction genre were the same themes that were important in our existence as Indigenous people. One of the dominant themes I explored twice was the concept of contact. When aliens land, because
yes.
Contact when aliens land is something Native people are very familiar with and are still dealing with to this day. So that became an interesting sort of metaphor or a storyline to explore. So other stuff like in dealing with environmentalism, what defines being Native? One of my short stories takes place with an astronaut in space who's beginning to wonder how he can be Native, or how it is to be Native in space. When you look at some of the traditional practices of Indigenous people, like honoring the four directions, you're in a place that does not have four directions. You can't burn sage or sweetgrass in a spaceship because of oxygen stuff. There's all sorts of limitations on what you would consider average, everyday Aboriginal practices. So I sort of explore that and time travel and all these different things, but how they affect or how they are influenced by contemporary Aboriginal life.
And so, just before we talk about the comedic lens, can I read something for my listeners?
Ahead.
This is right from Take Us to Your Chief. And speaking, I love this concept of contact. I think it's not only really interesting from an academic perspective and so on, but as you say, issues that First Nations folk are still dealing with, to this day, and for very good reason. But I'd love to unpack that a little bit with you. Quote, "Greetings, people of Earth." It had spoken to them. Chimo looked at Teddy, unsure whether the voice was referring to them, for he was fairly sure they were people from Earth, but he didn't want to jump to conclusions. White people were always changing the names of things, countries, people, and a bunch of other things. He wouldn't put it past them to change the name of the planet. He had seen on the news some time ago that Pluto was no longer considered a planet. It had been downgraded to the celestial equivalent of a non-status planet. Close quote. That's an excerpt from a story, Take Us to Your Chief, from the book Take Us to Your Chief by Drew Hayden Taylor. So Drew, out of context, a little hard to see the comedy maybe for the listeners, but I think really appropriate based on what you just mentioned, because this is essentially aliens landing, group of guys sitting around drinking beer, chatting, living life, and we've got this first contact.
Yeah, that's basically that story. There are two contact stories in it. One that sort of ends positively and one that ends not so positively. But the one you just read was actually the first story I wrote that I thought I could have fun with and just write it and laugh.
But it's exactly, write it and laugh. So now we go to the comedic lens. So your little crack against the white folk, little comedy about, I think there's a comedy there about drinking, a note or two there about drinking beer and about the camaraderie of these three friends who apparently don't really do much of anything. So I've got lots of questions around this kind of storytelling. But tell me about, I don't know, you're talking about some pretty serious issues here, and yet in a very lighthearted way.
Well, why can't I? Why?
That's a fair question.
Tragedy, both sides of the mask. If you go back to your Greek drama, and like look at the superhero one. Super disappointed. This guy has superpowers, and why does he have superpowers? Because his home is riddled with radon gas. The water is riddled with runoff from agricultural farms. So he's got sort of steroids and antibiotics in his water, and he's got black mold in his house, and so all these sort of things that are problems in everyday Native communities have contributed to making him a superhero. So sometimes you look at some of these situations and you can get angry and you can laugh. You can do both at the same time. And so when I was approaching some of these stories, I couldn't help thinking, this is so tragic, it's almost funny. And so I thought, oh, well, let's go with the funny thing, because that makes a lot of the issues I explore a lot more palatable.
So, Drew, I mean, I think it's pretty safe to say that you're a storyteller. You're not just a writer. You've done film, doc film. Is it REDSKINS, TRICKSTERS and Puppy Stew? That's the documentary, is it not?
That's correct, on Native humor.
Yeah, and you've got journalism in your background. I mean, you're stand-up comedy. You're a public speaker, etc. Tell me about the power of storytelling for change. So here we are talking about some pretty serious, I would say, global issues, frankly, but really contextually important to us as Canadians. And, First Nations, Métis, Inuit folk, and contact, and aliens, and all these things. Why, how come you're not an academic? How come you're not a politician?
Well,
you're a comedian. You're a storyteller. What? Tell me about that.
Pirate University.
Sorry, say that again.
I said, in order to be an academic, I think you have to have been to university.
Right. I think so. Yeah.
Passes.
Sorry, say that again. For some reason, you were cutting out there.
I said, well, in order to be an academic, you have to, I believe, have gone to university and have a number of letters behind your name. I have not been to university. I'm a member of the uneducated masses.
Ah, yes, of course.
And so, but I like to think of myself, and I think this is an overused term, I'm self-educated. By that, I mean I have read an extensive lot. I'm an avid reader. And, there's that old saying, if you want to be a good writer, you have to be a good reader. And if you want to be a great writer, you have to be a great reader. And I think everything I've learned and I describe myself this way, as a contemporary storyteller, comes from reading, comes from traveling as much as I can. I've been to 19 countries around the world. I've been to about 140 Native communities in Canada and the United States.
Wow.
It's from meeting and talking with people.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
Sitting down and putting this book together, or putting anything that I'm working on at the time, I think I'd like to think I'm well-rounded, and I sort of know what's going on, and I can sort of access different types of information and different experiences I've had and different books I've read, and put it together and carve it into something new that hopefully has never been experienced before.
And is this a way to change the narrative by telling stories, by telling new stories?
It helps. When I was talking with, one time I was having a conversation with a traditional storyteller from up near Manitoulin Island, and she said that in her opinion, we need new stories as much as we need the old stories. The old stories are very, very important, but times change, and we have to go with that change, because if cultures and people don't evolve with the times, they tend to stagnate. And if you know anything about your basic evolution, any people, place, or thing that stagnates and does not develop tends to die out. So we need our new stories for all the different medium, whether it's film, and in today you've got people, Native people, exploring hip hop and all these other different ways of expression, and I think that shows a healthy, vibrant culture.
Are you? I mean, it sounds to me like you're a pretty positive. You got a pretty positive approach to sort of what's going on currently in Canada and maybe even the world globally. A world traveler. I love the fact that you say you've learned by traveling, reading, and meeting other people. You don't need to go to university. I mean, you really don't. You don't need the letters behind your name if that's what you're committed to. It seems to me. But I guess. Yeah, are you hopeful? It sure sounds like it about what's next, about the future for Canada, about the future for Indigenous people around the world.
I think so. I mean, one of the reasons I did this was, if you look at a good chunk of contemporary Native literature, it can be broken down to usually three classifications: victim narrative, historical stories, or the effects of what I refer to as post-contact stress disorder.
Yeah, you talk about for the love, negative social issues, right?
Yeah,
Um,
a lot of our writers
yeah,
are preoccupied with that. Talking
sure.
about, there's a line in an essay by Thompson Highway in the beginning of his play, The REDSKINS, where he said, before the healing can take place, the poison must be exposed, and I think that's what was happening. But I remember in a conversation with an elder I had on the Blood Reserve in Alberta who told me, in his opinion, humor is the WD-40 of healing.
Nice.
That's
That's awesome.
So in my writing, I prefer to be much more positive. I understand the need for a lot of the stuff that explores the dysfunctional aspect of the Native community, but I'm also very, very forward and positive about the need to talk about the more positive aspects of our community, for sure.
So is that what this is going to do? I mean, from your perspective, obviously, it's adding to the literature, changing the conversation, providing the WD-40 of healing. I love that. Is it about that, Drew? From you've been in so many different different communities across Canada and different countries. I mean, do we need to spend more time together? Does that make sense? Do we need to be talking about this more, over dinner and at the local pub and so on?
I mean, it doesn't hurt. Spending time together is how we share, how we communicate. That is the origin of storytelling. I mean, you can have a storyteller, but unless that storyteller has an audience, has people who want to hear what that person has to say, effectiveness as a storyteller is greatly limited.
Sure.
So the more we get together, the more we share stories, concepts, adventures, and things of interest, I think it makes us stronger, more interesting people.
So you grew up reading science fiction. Favorite science? I mean, Ray Bradbury. I've got a couple favorite stories for sure. I'm looking in my office right here, right now, looking at a Blade Runner poster. One of my favorite films of all time.
Well, when I was growing up and I started reading, I first of all, I must say it almost seems like I went chronologically because one of my first favorite writers was H.G. Wells.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Right, the Time Machine.
Sure.
Invisible Man, all that stuff. I just loved that stuff. And I was really actually unaware. It wasn't until I became older that I understood that a lot of science fiction is essentially metaphoric.
Mm.
Time Machine is an exploration of social status in the English world. Because you had the Eloi and the Morlocks, and the Eloi were the elite, and the Morlocks were the people who worked in the coal mines and the mechanics and underground, and it was an exploration of status in English society. Frankenstein was an exploration written by a 19-year-old girl. Was an exploration of what would happen if men somehow had the ability to create life, and women were left out of the equation. So look what happens when men can create life, right? So I read those early stories, not really understanding the metaphor involved, and then from there, I went into. I was a big John Wyndham fan. The Chrysalids, the
Chrysalids. Wow, Day of the Triffids. Holy smokes!
Exactly, and sort of went on and on and on, and I think it was John Campbell, who goes there, and all these other stuff, and then gradually, I began to move more towards the more influential stuff, contemporary stuff in the 60s and 70s that had an influence. I read my Ray Bradbury, I read my Asimov, my Heinlein, etc., and
little Philip K. Dick in there.
Yeah, a little Philip K. Dick in there. I read my Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep and Scanner Darkly, etc.
Yeah, no, it's cool. Your website, I love your website. I'm just looking at it here. By the way, folks, it's drewhaydentaylor.com for more information about Drew's work and his writing and his all the things that he's into. And the book is Take Us to Your Chief, published by Douglas and McIntyre. Drew, you say that, or somebody has written about you that you've been spreading the gospel of native literature to the world. Is there a truth there? Is there something that that us white folk, us Westerners, us those on the outside, if you will, are missing out on because we're not, a little more steeped in Native literature, because we don't have a better understanding of our First Nations, Métis, and Inuit folk?
I think there is a growing understanding and a growing awareness. I mean, it's much better now than when I began 30 years ago. 30 years ago, there was only a handful of Native writers, and very few were getting the national exposure.
Sure.
You have your list of best Canadian authors in general, and you'll find Tom King and Joseph Boyden on that list. So I think people are beginning to understand and open up and enjoy Indigenous storytelling method, and are learning from it and learning to really appreciate it.
So if you were standing in front of, and I'm sure you've had this opportunity many times, but you're in front of a primary. My wife does a teacher librarian, primary school. I don't know. Let's say you're there to read a story from your new book, and you're going to answer questions. What are the kids going to be focusing on? What are you going to be focusing on as you say to them, guys, this is about telling stories, and here, and there are good reasons to be hopeful, and things are changing. I mean, it sounds to me like that's sort of your message, but what are you telling to the younger generations? I've got a 9 and 11-year-old. They're growing up in a world where, they have an understanding about our history that I didn't, and that my parents certainly didn't. So I guess what I'm trying to get to is, just that kind of that what's next? How do we continue to shift the conversation?
Well, I think, as you heard me say, that the perception of Native literature was growing kind of limited, just as
sure.
of a dysfunction. And now that we're beginning to, if you'll pardon the bad metaphor, we're beginning to get off the reservation and explore all the different methods of storytelling available to us.
Right.
I mean, you look at Native people, our interests, our abilities, our views of the world are as varied and as wide as any culture that exists today,
sure.
Culture. So one of the things I've always worked towards was sort of finding new ways of expressing the Aboriginal perspective. And what's happening these days is there's been an explosion of interest in putting the Aboriginal fingerprints on genre fiction. My very first novel was a Native vampire novel called The Night Wanderer. My second novel was magic realism, Motorcycles and Sweetgrass. In my theater career, I have written full-scale farcical comedies. I have adapted and indigenized a 1930s Bertolt Brecht Kurt Weill musical. A friend of mine, a woman named Katareka Winsey Dam, has put together a collection of international indigenous erotica, sort of like a 50 Shades of Red.
Oh, that's hysterical. That's awesome.
Daniel Heath Justice has written a trilogy of stories with elves and Lord of the Rings type elements in it, sword, sorcery, that type of thing. As it has been influenced heavily by his own Cherokee upbringing. And again, going back to Tom King, when Tom King is not busy writing award-winning fiction and nonfiction, his favorite hobby is writing murder mysteries. He's written 2 so far, and he's working on another 2. So I think the next mountain to climb, the next horizon is going to be looking at all the different ways Native people are conquering genre fiction.
It's cool. It's amazing. I'm looking forward to seeing your play in a world created by a drunken god, by the way.
Okay, sure.
Who stars in that? That's what I want to know.
In a world created by a drunken god, that was it's a what-if story.
Right.
I say I don't do autobiographical pieces, but what I often do is I take pieces out of my own personal life and blow it completely out of proportion. And that is a good example of that. That's one that I always wondered, because I'm half Native and half white, but I have no connection to my white half. it's a play about wondering a little bit about the path not taken, what
right.
my white side would be. Play explores a white perception of life, I guess.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's a marvelous title, and certainly opens the door for me to ask a few other questions. That's for sure. You know, can we do a part two, Drew? Can we set up another time to finish this conversation? It's clearly a conversation that's ongoing that you have with many other people, and now thanks to you, we've started as well, and I hope a conversation that others are going to start picking up on. Check out Drew's work, drewhaydentaylor.com. That's Hayden, Taylor.com. And the book is Take Us to Your Chief and Other Stories, published by Douglas and McIntyre. Drew, what a pleasure chatting, man. I mean, let's do a part two down the road and go a little deeper.
I'll be sitting by the phone.
I bet you will. What's next, Drew? Are you on a little bit of a book tour, or?
A little bit of a book tour, but right now I've been commissioned by the National Arts Centre in Ottawa. Next year, as you know, is Confederation, and they've asked me to write a play about John A. Macdonald from the Aboriginal perspective.
Wow. Well, I think a drunken god should be a character in that. That's my 2 cents.
I'm working on it.
Drew, thanks a lot for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely no problem.